3. Taking up about a quarter of the area inside Arantel's outermost wall and a huge block that occupied most of the western district was the Arantel Public Cemetery. Of course, other cities had cemeteries, but not as gigantic as this one. They needed it to prevent undead from spawning. How undead spawned was still a mystery in many ways, but they often appeared, with their impure life, in places where a living thing had met its end. If the person died a tragic death or went unmourned, the chances of undead appearing were much higher. For that reason, it was very common for them to spawn in ruins or places where battles had been fought. Since Arantel was close to the sites of the battles with the Empire, they needed to build a huge cemetery, a place to mourn, so that their dead wouldn't turn undead. This went for the Empire as well, so the two sides arranged it so that even though they were at war with each other, they would both make sure the other could properly mourn their dead. Even if they were killing each other on the battlefield, they knew that the undead who attacked the living out of hatred were the common enemy of all life. There was another problem with undead. If they were left alone, the probability that a stronger undead would spawn went up. That's why adventurers and guards swept the graveyard every night and took out any undead while they were still just lower tier. The graveyard was surrounded by a wall. It was the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead. At about 13 feet, it wasn't as tall as the city walls, but it was fairly thick, and it was possible to walk along the top. The gates were sturdy, too. This was all as a precaution against the undead that spawned inside. Flanking the gates were staircases that led to lookouts. 5 men to a side exchanged yawns while keeping watch. Although it was nighttime, light posts lit with continual light kept the place bright. That said, there were still pockets of darkness here and there, and gravestones impeded visibility. One guard with a spear, gazing absent-mindedly out over the cemetery, said to the fellow next to him through a yawn, "Quiet night." "Yeah, just those 5 skeletons so far. Seems like the spawn rate went way down all of a sudden." "Yeah, maybe everyone's souls were called to be out with the 4 gods. If so, we lucked out." The other guards joined in. "As long as it's skeletons and zombies, we can handle them. Although skeletons are a pain to get with the spears. The worst one I ever saw was a wight. Mine's a skeleton centipede. If the adventurer on guard nearby hadn't run over, I'd have been a gunner." "A skeleton centipede?" "The ugly ones only come out if you overlook weak ones. Just wipe them out while they're wimpy, and we don't have to deal with the strong ones." "Exactly. The liquor the squad patrolling the tomb sent us the other week after our leader gave them what for tasted great, but I never want to go through an ordeal like that ever again." "But when you think about it like that, doesn't it kind of give you the creeps that nothing has spawned lately?" "Why?" "Well, like, maybe we're missing them or something." "Supposedly there aren't usually that many to begin with. There's talk that the reason we had such a high rate of appearance was because we were burying people who died in battles against the Empire. In other words, maybe this is what it's like when there's no fighting." The guards nodded at one another. Villages buried people just like they did, but they never heard of a place with so many undead. "Supposedly the Katse Plain is just a mess." Yeah, the undead that spawn there are on a whole another level." The plain where the kingdom and the empire clashed was known as a region with frequent undead outbreaks, so adventurers requested by the kingdom and knights from the empire worked together to clean it up. Sweeping the area was so important that the kingdom and empire both sent goods to maintain a little town built out there to support the people suppressing the undead. "I heard a rumor that—" one of the guards started to say and then closed his mouth. One of the others got anxious. "Hey, if you're trying to scare us, quiet!" The one who had closed his mouth was looking toward the graveyard as if he could pierce the darkness if he stared hard enough. The others followed his line of sight and looked too. "Do Do you hear something? Probably just your imagination. Nah, I don't hear anything, but it smells kind of like dirt. Like when we had to dig that one time? It smells like that. Okay, not funny. Cut it out. Huh? Hey, look over there! One of the guards pointed out into the graveyard. Everyone turned to look. 2 guards were running frantically toward the gate. They were both breathing heavily, eyes wide and bloodshot, hair plastered to their foreheads with sweat. The guards in the lookout had a bad feeling. Patrols went out in groups of at least 10. Why were there only 2? Running that desperately with no weapons, they could only be running away from something. Open up! Open the gate! A guard ran down the stairs in response to their panicked screams and opened the gate. The pair tumbled out of the graveyard as if they couldn't wait for the door to open. What the heck? The guard started to ask, but the 2 patrollers, faces white as sheets, interrupted him, shouting with what little breath they had left. Close the gate! Hurry! Frightened by how upset they were, the guards all helped shut and bar the gate. What the heck happened? Where are the others? The guard who looked up to respond had terror written all over his face. They were eaten by undead! Learning that 8 of their comrades had been killed, the guards looked at their squad leader. He responded with orders. Hey, someone go look from up top! One of them sprang up and started running up the stairs, but froze partway. What's wrong? Trembling uncontrollably, the guards screamed back. It's undead! A huge mob of them! If they listened closely, they could hear a kind of squirming noise coming from the other side of the wall. Everyone followed the first guard, and one by one they were rendered speechless by the view. A number of undead for which there were no words was coming across the graveyard, heading straight for them. What the heck? How are there so many? It's not even 100 or 2. There's gotta be at least 1,000? There were so many, even just in the areas the light reached, that they couldn't count them. Figuring in the human shapes wriggling in the darkness, their number was unfathomable. The undead shuffled their swaying way toward the gate in a horde, accompanied by the smell of rot. Among them were not only skeletons and zombies, but also stronger undead, though not as many, such as ghouls, ghasts, wights, swoleskins, and corrupt dead. All the guards were shaking now. The city proper was behind another wall, so unless that was breached, no residents would be attacked. But they weren't sure they could take this mob, even if they called for a general mobilization of all the guards. They may have been called guards, but they were just burlier versions of regular citizens. They weren't confident they could subdue this many undead. And some undead possessed the ability to turn anything they killed into the same type of monster. One wrong move and they'd be getting attacked by their undead comrades. On top of that, there weren't any flying ones now, but they knew if they didn't wipe these out soon, some fiendish flyers would show up, and that terrified them even more. The flood of undead reached the wall. Bam! Bam! Undead with low intelligence made use of their inability to feel pain to senselessly beat on the gate. They must have known they'd get to attack some living things if they broke it down. Bam! Bam! The repeated pounding sound, the squeaking of the hinges, the moaning of countless monsters. They didn't need a battering ram. The mob of undead that rushed the gate without even considering if they could break it or not performed as well as any siege weapon. The cold sweat that drenched the guards' backs when they saw that was like a bucket of ice water. Ring the bell! Get help from the garrison! You two, alert the other gates that this is an emergency! The squad leader returned to his senses and started commanding. The rest of you, use your spears to stab the undead near the gate from above! His voice reminded the guards what they were supposed to be doing, and they began plunging their spears into the throng of undead below. There were so many they couldn't even see the ground. They could stab at random and still skewer one. Thrust, wind up, thrust again. Murky blood spilled, the reek of decomposing bodies numbed the guards' noses, and the repetitiveness of their frantic motions made them feel almost like zombies themselves. Several undead lost their unlives, tumbled to the ground, and were trampled by the ones behind them. Since they were so lacking in intelligence, they didn't even try to counterattack. Lulled by the repetitive task, the guards gradually began to relax. But just as if the monsters had been waiting for that to happen, "Ah!" Someone screamed, and when the others turned to look, one of the guards had something long, wrapped and wriggling around his neck. It had a slimy pink gleam to it. Intestines. At the other end was an egg-shaped yet human corpse with its front split wide open vertically. Inside the gaping cavity were more entrails than one person could ever possibly have, writhing like parasitic worms. It was an undead called an organ egg. The squirming intestines yanked on the guard. "Ah!" Faster than anyone could move to save him, he yelped and fell. "Help! Someone! Ah!" He shrieked at the top of his lungs. The other guards had no choice but to witness their comrade's fate. Undead piled onto every part of his body and began to eat him alive. The armor protecting his torso and the efforts he made to protect his head only prolonged the brutality. First his fingers went, then his calves, then his face was chewed apart. "Fall back! Retreat behind the wall!" ordered the squad leader, seeing that the organ egg's innards were wriggling again. Everyone rushed down the stairs. The pounding behind them grew stronger, and the screeches made it plain that the door was about to give. The sense of tragedy gradually mounted. It didn't seem very likely that the door would hold until reinforcements arrived, and the undead that appeared would only grow stronger. If the gate opened, a torrent of death would come flooding out, and who knew how much damage would be done. The moment all the guards' faces had turned a sickly shade of despair, a metallic clank sounded. Everyone instinctively turned to see where it had come from. It was a warrior in full plate armor, astride a magical beast with wise black eyes. Next to him was a woman so pretty she looked out of place. "Hey! It's dangerous here! Hurry up and—" Having said that much, the guard noticed the metal plate hanging from the warrior's neck. "An adventurer!" But when he saw that it was copper, his slightly raised hopes deflated. There's no way an adventurer of the lowest possible rank will be able to turn this situation around. Disappointment shone in all the guards' eyes. The warrior sprang lightly off the beast, as if he didn't weigh a thing. "Didn't you hear me? Get away from here!" "Nabe, my swords." The warrior's voice was soft compared to the guard's yell, but strangely it could be heard clearly over the symphony of noise the undead were making. The beautiful woman ran over to him, and the warrior drew a great sword. "Hey, look behind you. Better watch out." The guards whipped around as if repelled by the sound of the warrior's voice and faced the end. A shadow loomed taller than the 13-foot wall. Countless corpses had gathered together to form an undead titan, a necroswarm giant. "Ah!" As the guards screamed and went to flee, every man for himself, an unexpected scene unfolded before their eyes. The warrior held his sword like he was about to throw a javelin. To do what? The next moment answered that question. He threw it, and at an unbelievable speed. Turning quickly back around to watch where it flew, they saw something even more unexpected. The necroswarm giant, a colossal undead monster they would have never thought could be beaten, got knocked back as if it had taken a blow from an even bigger giant. It was defeated. As proof the giant had fallen, a colossal thud sounded over the squirming noises. "That thing was in my way," was all he said, before striding forward with his other sword drawn. "Open the gate." For a moment the guards didn't realize what he'd said. They blinked a few times, and the warrior's words finally sank into their brains. Don't be stupid! There's a huge mob of undead on the other side! Oh? The name's Momon. Does that have anything to do with me? The guards were all overawed by the black warrior's overflowing confidence, and couldn't say anything. Well, if you don't want to open the gate, I guess I can't blame you. I'll just let myself in. The warrior took a running start, kicked off the cobblestones, and vanished over the wall. He had leaped over a 13-foot wall in a single bound, while wearing full plate armor. Were they seeing things? Unable to process what had just happened, they all stared, gape-mouthed at the space where no one was standing anymore. The beautiful woman who was left behind floated lightly into the air and was about to soar over the wall when a voice called out to stop her. "Please wait, that I beg you! Take me too, that I ask!" The voice's owner was the robust magical beast the warrior had been riding. She sounded just as dignified as she looked. The beautiful woman frowned slightly, not that it compromised her beauty one bit, and told the beast, "Take those stairs. Don't tell me you're gonna break your legs falling from that height." "Of course not! Then away to my master's side I go! Master, wait for me, that I ask!" The huge magical beast scampered past the guards, agilely ascended the stairs, and jumped down to the other side of the wall. Then it was silent. It was as if a typhoon had gone by. How long did they stand there, dumbfounded? Then one guard realized something and said, his voice trembling, "Hey, can you hear it?" "What?" "The noises the undead were making." Even if they strained their ears, they couldn't hear a sound. Silence had swallowed them up. All the pounding on the door had stopped. Awestruck, the shivering guard murmured, "Wow, can you believe it? That warrior went in there against all those undead. And he actually broke through the mob. And is still going." The guards were overcome by amazement and admiration. The reason the noises had stopped was that all the undead in the area had been drawn away toward a new target. And the reason the noises didn't return was that the battle was still ongoing, so the undead hadn't come back. The guards ran to the top of the wall in disbelief. Could this be real? They gasped. "What? That warrior? What the?" There were bodies everywhere, a mountain of them. There were so many corpses lying around that the guards couldn't see the ground. Some of them, twitching, hadn't completely lost their negative life, but none were able to fight. As they thought, the sounds of a far-off battle drifted over on the putrid-smelling breeze. "You gotta be kidding me! He's still fighting? He made an enemy of that whole mob and broke through? There's no way! Who the heck is that guy?" "He said his name was Momon, right? That copperplate has to be a lie, right? He's got to be one of those adamantite plates you hear rumors of, don't you think?" Everyone nodded to someone's muttering. There was no way that was a copperplate adventurer. He was a hero who had to have the highest-ranking plate. That was all they could think. "We may have just seen a legend. The Dark Warrior. No, the Dark Hero." The others all nodded in agreement. Every time his right arm moved, undead went flying. Every time his left arm moved, undead were sliced in two. Ainz had advanced like a tornado of one-hit death, but now he stopped. "You guys are such a pain." Holding both greatswords he'd remade with magic, he scanned the crowd of undead surrounding him with fed-up eyes. He addressed his sword, grimy with bodily fluids, to the monsters. With a flurry of flinches, the undead tried to squirm away from him. Undead shouldn't have been able to feel fear, but they sure seemed scared of Ainz.
I apologize for the trouble that I do.
The voice came from above Ainz, quite a ways above. The wise king of the forest was floating floppily, 4 legs splayed, in the air. Her hair drooped and her voice was cheerless. The one she was apologizing to wasn't Ainz.
Could you not move around? You're so soft and fluffy, it's hard to hold you.
Narbrul's voice came from somewhere around the wise king of the forest's belly. It wasn't the king who was flying. Narbrul, half sunk into her squishy body, was holding her up using fly.
I'm sorry that I am.
The lower tier undead, with their subpar intelligence, didn't immediately treat Ainz as an enemy. Their senses were keenly attuned to life, so they took Ainz to be one of them. But they weren't going to miss the living wise king of the forest. As a result, Ainz was drawn into a brawl, and to avoid the albeit medium-low possibility that the beast would be injured, Narbrul had to heft her out of the undead's reach. Ainz took a step forward. The undead mob took a step back. The distance between them didn't change one bit, and the circle remained intact. The circle moved according to how Ainz moved. They seemed to be looking for openings to attack, but if they set one foot inside the circle, they'd be destroyed in one hit. That's why they simply encircled him, and none were attacking. It was the result of the low-intelligence monsters finally learning, after a ridiculous amount of repetition, that they would be annihilated if they made a careless approach. But I'm not going to get anywhere at this rate. Ainz was only grumbling about the annoying amount of undead still remaining. If he were to make a serious attempt at getting by, he'd plow right through this mob. But if he barreled ahead and the undead spread out, the guards back there might be killed. If that happened, he would lose the witnesses, who would testify that he resolved the incident. To minimally guarantee their safety, he needed to draw off at least a good chunk of the monsters. It did slow his progress, though. But Narbrul took his comment at face value.
Then let's call the army from Nazarick, my lord. With 100 minions or so, we could eliminate all in this graveyard who oppose you in the blink of an eye.
Don't be stupid. How many times do I have to tell you the reason we came to this city?
But Lord Ainz, if your aim is to gain a reputation, would it perhaps not be better to wait until the undead had breached the gate and racked up scores of human casualties?
I've already considered that. If I were well informed as to the aim of our enemy, the war potential of this city, and so on, I may have taken that route. But as it is, we barely know anything, so I'd like to avoid losing any more initiative. I don't want things going according to their plan. It's also possible that another team would swoop in to steal our show while we were standing around.
I see. Brilliant, Lord Ainz. I should have expected that a supreme being would have thought everything out. I'm struck anew by admiration. By the way, I apologize for still being so ignorant, but I wonder if you might tell me if you don't think that sending in some minions who specialize in stealth abilities, like 8-edged assassins or shadow demons, would have been a better plan. Then you could just stand back and watch the fight, unless anything major changed, to gauge the best timing.
Ainz said nothing and just looked up at her. The undead took the silence as lowered guard and stepped into the circle, and were hastily cut down.
If I tell you everything, how will you ever learn to think for yourself?
Yes, sir. My humble apologies.
Shaken, albeit slightly, Ainz whipped around to see how far from the gate they had come, and to check if the guards could see them.
But, that said, time is short. I have no choice. I'll have these guys slice through for us.
Ainz unleashed a power.
Create middle tier undead. Jack the Ripper. Create middle tier undead. Corpse Collector.
As the skill was used, 2 undead appeared. One wore a trench coat and had its face covered with a laughing mask. Its fingers turned into oversized, sharp scalpels partway through. The other had a robust enough physique, but its body was covered in pus and wrapped in yellowed bandages. At the ends of chains anchored to its flesh by several hooks were moaning skulls.
Get 'em.
Taking Ainz's order, the two undead sprang at the surrounding monsters. There were only two of them, but their power was overwhelming. While Jack the Ripper sliced off limbs with its scalpels and the corpse collector ripped off heads with its chains, Ainz took an added measure.
Those plus these should be good. Create lower tier undead. Wraith. Create lower tier undead. Bone vulture.
He summoned a few of each and gave them all orders.
If anyone enters this graveyard, chase them out. I don't care if you kill adventurers, but leave the guards.
The wraiths drifted into the air, and the bone vultures flapped their bone wings. Ainz chuckled to himself in satisfaction that his preparation was complete. He'd dispatched the lower-tier undead to make sure that no adventurers stole this great job out from under them by using flight magic to swoop in and defeat the ringleader.
Now then, shall we?
Thanks to the two undead Ainz had sent out, the mob had thinned out quite a bit. Ainz gripped his swords and jumped in. Accompanied only by Narbrel, Ainz reached the mausoleum farthest back and saw a group of suspicious-looking people doing something in a circle outside. The black robes concealing each member were not dyed very well, so there were patches of lighter and darker areas. Black triangular caps covered their heads except for the eyes. A strange pattern was carved into the ends of the wooden staves they held. The figures were all different heights, but judging by their silhouettes, they were all male. Only one man, standing in the middle of the circle and looking a bit like an undead himself, had his face uncovered. The impression he made was not so shabby. In his hand he clutched a black stone, and it seemed like he was focusing his spirit on it. The wind carried the sound of undulating murmurs to where Ainz stood. Sometimes they were high-pitched, sometimes low. The harmonizing undertones sounded almost like a prayer, but this was no solemn service for the dead. It was more like some kind of blasphemous evil ritual.
Should we launch a sneak attack?
Narbrel spoke softly so only Ainz could hear, but he shook his head.
That won't work. It seems like they've already noticed us.
Because neither of them had stealth skills, they walked right over. They'd avoided the lights, but if their opponents had night vision, they'd be able to spot them as if it were the middle of the day. And, in Ainz's experience, there was a mental connection between summoned monsters and the summoner. There was no way their approach hadn't been sensed after they'd killed that many. There were actually a few people looking right at them. Ainz guessed the reason they didn't attack immediately was that he wasn't the only one who wanted to talk, so they walked straight toward them. When they reached the light, the members of the group braced themselves, and one of them spoke to the man in the center.
Lord Khajiit, they're here.
Well, now we know they're idiots. Or I guess it could be a fake name. I'll take it with a grain of salt.
Hey there! Isn't it kind of a waste to perform a boring ritual on such a beautiful night?
Ha! I'm the one who decides what night is appropriate for ritual. More importantly, who are you? How did you break through that mob of undead?
The man in the center of the circle, Khajiit, if it wasn't a fake name, did seem to be the highest-ranking one among them, and addressed Ainz on behalf of the group.
I'm an adventurer who undertook a request. I'm looking for a certain boy. I'm sure I don't even have to say his name for you to know who I mean.
As the members of the group shifted into subtly more defensive positions, Ainz whispered,
"Okay, then,"
under his breath. The possibility that they were innocents who had just gotten mixed up in the incident vanished. As Khajiit scanned the area, Ainz smiled wryly at him from under his helmet.
Are you the only ones? Any others? What? Who asks that? I get that you're worried about an ambush, but maybe you should think a little more before you start chit-chatting. This guy must just be another pawn. Ein seemed to have lost interest, and his shoulders slumped. Then he replied,
It's just us. We flew in a straight shot.
That's a lie. It can't be.
Sensing something in those words of conviction, Ainz countered,
Whether you believe it or not is up to you. More pertinently, if you return the boy unharmed, you won't have to die, Khajiit.
Khajiit glanced at the foolish disciple who'd said his name.
What's your name?
Tell me something first. There's someone besides you guys, isn't there?
Khajiit shot Ainz an icy stare.
We're it.
It's not just you guys. You must have someone with a stabbing weapon. So you're trying to hide him? Or is he hiding because he's scared of us?
Suddenly, a woman's voice came from inside the mausoleum.
Aha! So you investigated those corpses. I see. Nicely done.
She slowly moved into view, jangling with each step.
You!
She heard the harshness in his voice and smiled guiltily.
Yeah, they figured it out already. There's no point in hiding. Plus, I can't use conceal life, so I really was just hiding.
Even though Ainz had told them what he was after, they weren't holding Inferia for ransom. He was considering the possibility that he'd already been killed when the woman spoke to him.
So hey, can I get your name, Mr. Guy? Oh, I'm Clementine. Nice to meet you.
I don't think there's any point in you hearing it, but it's Momon.
I've never heard of him. Have you? I don't know him either. I collected all the info on high-ranking adventurers in this town, but there was no Momon. How'd you even find this place? I left you those dying words about the sewers.
The answer is under your cape. Let's see it.
Whoa, pervert! You dirty lech!
Having said that much, her face twisted into a grin that sliced across her face, ear to ear.
Just kidding. You mean these?
Clementine flipped open her cape to reveal something that looked like gleaming scale armor, but Ainz, with his superior vision, saw what it was right away. Those were not the tabs of metal used to make scale armor. She was wearing countless adventurer plates: platinum, gold, silver, iron, copper. There were sparkles of mithril and orichalcum among them. These were the marks of all the adventurers she had killed, her hunting trophies. The rubbing of metal on metal was almost like innumerable resentful voices.
Those told us where you were.
Clementine pulled a face that said she had no idea what he was talking about, but Ainz wasn't in an explaining mood.
Nabe, you take Khajiit and the rest of those men. I'll get this lady.
Then he dropped his voice and told her to keep her eye on the sky.
Understood.
Khajiit's face was something between a bitter smile and a sneer. Narbril shot him a chilly look that implied how bored she would be.
Clementine, how about we go kill each other over there?
He strolled away without even waiting for her response. He was sure she wouldn't object, and the footsteps following leisurely after him confirmed it. After they'd taken some distance, an explosion of lightning flooded the area near Khajiit and Narbril with a blinding glare. As if that was their cue, Ainz and Clementine stared each other down.
So, the adventurers I killed in that shop were your friends? Are you mad because I killed your buddies?
She continued in her mocking tone.
Ha 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 ha! That caster really cracked me up, believing to the very end that someone would come. There was no way to survive my attacks until help arrived with that flimsy physique. But maybe you were the one who is supposed to save them. Sorry, kill them all.
Ein shook his head in response to Clementine's taunting laughter.
There's not really any need to apologize.
Oh? Bummer. Getting people who are all pissed, like, how could you? To surrender is hilarious. Why aren't you mad? That's no fun. They weren't your friends?
I might have done something similar under certain circumstances, so it'd be pretty hypocritical to come down on you for it.
Ein slowly moved into a fighting stance.
However, they were tools I was using to build my reputation. They were supposed to gossip about my exploits to the other adventurers when we got back to the inn, about how I'm a hero who, with just one other party member, repulsed the wise king of the forest. The fact that you upset my plans is extremely displeasing to me.
Perhaps picking something up from his tone of voice, Clementine grinned.
I see. Oh no, you hate me. By the way, coming over here was a mistake. That pretty lady's a caster, right? Then she'll never beat Cash. Maybe if the pairings had been reversed, she'd have had a chance. But, well, nah, she wouldn't have been able to beat me either.
Oh, I'm pretty sure Nabe could beat you.
Don't be ridiculous. A caster couldn't win against me. I just swoop in and shook. That's how it ends. Always is.
Ah, so you're a very confident warrior, then.
Yeah, of course. There aren't any warriors in this country who can beat me. Well, almost none anyway.
Okay, then. I have an idea. I'll give you a handicap. That'll be my revenge on you.
Clementine narrowed her eyes. It was the first time she looked uncomfortable.
According to the intelligence gathered by the Flurry Gang, there are only 5 people who could put up a decent fight against me. Gazef Stronov, Gargaran from the Blue Roses, Loisenberg Arberon from the Drops of Red, and then there's Brian Unglaus, and Vestur Klof de Laufen, who's retired. But, you know, they don't really have a chance, even if I did throw away the magic item my country gave me.
She looked at Ainz with her lips drawn so far back her smile was disturbing.
I don't know what kind of piece of shit you got for a face under that helmet, but Clementine doesn't lose. I've entered the hero realm.
Compared to Clementine's fury, Ainz was infinitely calm.
That's why I'm giving you a handicap. I refuse to take you seriously.